Hey, and welcome. This is the Ben Shapiro Show. A little bit later on in this hour, we're going to be having on pollster Kristen Soltis-Anderson to explain to us the status of the Democratic race. We'll also be getting to President Trump campaigning in Los Angeles, snarling traffic, but it's always snarled in L.A. I mean, that's my hometown. We'll get to all of that in just a moment. But first, we have to talk about the woke scolding of the left, which is reaching preposterous new heights. I mean, bizarre and preposterous new heights. So a couple of examples. Okay, example number one. So Sean Spicer was the former White House press secretary, and he kind of left in somewhat disgrace because it turns out that some people are pretty good at fibbing with a straight face, and some people are not particularly good at fibbing with a straight face. Sean Spicer is very bad at fibbing with a straight face. He's a longtime Republican Party insider. He was kind of put in the press secretary position just because he was there. And it turns out that he always looked as though he was dying behind his eyes every time he was asked to shade a particular story. So he ends up leaving. Trump is unhappy with his performance. And now he's showing up again on Dancing with the Stars. Now, I understand that Dancing with the Stars is a historic, important, deeply American institution. That to appear on Dancing with the Stars is actually one of the great honors of an American's life. That nobody, unless they have accomplished tremendous things in their life, should appear on Dancing with the Stars. Alternatively, it's a dumb reality show that's extraordinarily kitschy. Well, Sean Spicer was tapped to be on Dancing with the Stars, which, frankly, I'd sort of predicted like the day after he was out. And he shows up in a lime green shirt, playing the bongos and dancing to the Spice Girls. Here's a bit of what it sounded like.
Former White House press secretary Sean Spicer.
There he is playing bongos, man. Oh, no. And there he is dancing with a scantily clad woman, dancing salsa and sliding. Yeah, it didn't go great for him. The judges weren't a big fan of his dancing. But as it turns out, this is worthy of controversy. Why? Because everything is worthy of controversy. Every single thing. How could Hollywood ever allow Sean Spicer to appear on your television again? There's a piece in the Washington Post today by a woman named Emily Yar called Dancing with the Stars perfected a formula for kitschy, escapist joy. Can it survive today's politics? And then the story describes how horrible it is. Horrible that Sean Spicer would appear on this show. Just shocking. Shocking. Okay, why? Because, I mean, obviously he's a very, very bad man. A very bad man. So the article describes how Sean Spicer got the leaders of the show in trouble. Dancing isn't the ratings giant it once was, says the Washington Post. Last season averaged 8.6 million viewers, barely squeaking into the top 35 most watched TV shows. But it can still hijack the water cooler. An outright furor erupted when Sean Spicer, formerly President Trump's falsehood-prone press secretary, was announced as a cast member for season 28, which premieres on Monday. And here's the irony that tells you everything about dancing. The scandal wasn't that a former White House official was selling himself out for a cheesy reality show. It was that the show had decided to sprinkle its image-bolstering magic upon him. On Monday's episode, Spicer donned a lime green shirt with ruffled sleeves and performed a salsa to the Spice Girls' Spice Up With Your Life with professional partner Lindsay Arnold. In a pre-recorded introduction, Spicer noted his time in the White House was tumultuous and that he felt it was finally time to have some fun. The judges, however, were not impressed with Spicer's dance skills. They awarded him 12 out of 30 points, the second lowest score of the night. Some fans of the show, well aware that its inspirational storylines and gentle edits have helped humanize contentious personalities from Kate Gosselin to Rick Perry, complained loudly, as did high-profile ABC personnel. I deeply abhor this decision by the company I work for and truly love, tweeted Grey's Anatomy showrunner Krista Vernoff. Oh my God. They had a B-list celebrity on Dancing with the Stars, and she didn't like it. Wow, world ended. Obviously, this country needs a conversation about systemic and systematic discrimination against people who don't like Sean Spicer. Because that's what's happened here. This is just the patriarchy once again rearing its ugly head by inviting a one-time press secretary who served for like a month onto Dancing with the Stars. Even the show's affable host, Tom Bergeron, released a statement suggesting he was disappointed by a choice as political as Spicer, as opposed to the former Texas Governor Rick Perry. Apparently, he's competing against Queer Eye co-host Karamo Brown, former NFL linebacker Ray Lewis, and country singer Lauren Elena. I'd like to point out that Ray Lewis was accused of being involved in a murder. Ray Lewis was involved allegedly in a murder that ended with him burning a suit of clothing. No controversy over that. Controversy over Sean Spicer, a White House press secretary, being bad at being White House press secretary. It's well done, everybody. Dancing executive producer Andrew Linares said he had no fear of politicizing the competition. He said, we're excited about having a show that creates a space where people from different backgrounds and different walks of life can come together in a really fun competition. That's really the focus. But no, Sean Spicer must be ousted. He's a bad, evil, bad man. Longtime casting director Dina Katz said, it's about creating the best dinner party possible, where you have 12 different people that you wouldn't necessarily ever think of together. You want some of those people who are in the zeitgeist, but you want some of those people who are touchstones that you remember from your favorite sitcom. But this is very bad. How dare they? Just awful. Just awful. So, well done to everyone who's very upset about Sean Spicer being on Dancing with the Stars. Speaking of which, and we're talking about canceling people, canceling Sean Spicer, someone who actually was canceled was a comedian named Shane Gillis. Why? Because he made jokes. So according to the Washington Post, Shane Gillis will not be making his Saturday Night Live debut, much to the relief of many who decried the comedian for using racist and homophobic language in recently recorded podcasts. But not everyone is celebrating the sketch comedy show's decision to part with the comic. Right, because this is ridiculous. He is a comic. He says edgy things that cross lines. This is what comics do. The fact that we are now treating comics like presidential candidates and presidential candidates like comics should be an indicator that we have a problem. Prominent comedians, including Rob Schneider of SNL and Norm Macdonald, slammed the NBC show for reversing course on Gillis. Schneider said, as a former NSL cast member, I am sorry that you had the misfortune of being a cast member during this era of cultural unforgiveness, where comedic misfires are subject to the intolerable inquisition of those who never risked bombing on stage themselves. That, of course, is exactly right. Andrew Yang, my boy Andrew Yang, Democratic presidential candidate, he had said earlier this week, we need to live in a society of forgiveness, and talked about how he'd sit down with Shane Gillis, but not the people at SNL. Not the people at SNL. Most of the comments that found Gillis under fire last week didn't take place in a stand-up setting, but on Matt and Shane's secret podcast. Okay, still comedy. You don't have to have a live audience to be comedying, people. Controversy erupted after a journalist shared a clip of one 2018 episode that featured the duo using racist slurs against Chinese people and mocking their accents. It wasn't enough. Norm Macdonald tweeted out, hey Shane, I'm so sorry. I can't even imagine how you must feel. The work it takes to get to that show and to have it snatched away by some guy who does spoken bird poetry. Unacceptable. Please DM me, pal, when you have a moment. I'm so sorry. Sashir Zamata, who quietly left SNL in 2017, said, say whatever you want, but you also have to know the audience is going to feel how they feel. And they also have a right to say what they want to say. They do have a right to say what they want to say and feel how they want to feel. But you know what the comedy world should not do? Bow its head before the wokescolds. Because if they do, it's the end of comedy. It's just absurd. Jim Jeffries said, it's just cancel culture. The guy shouldn't have been fired. It's a couple of things back in his history. Are we going to go back through everyone's history? Or are we going to get rid of every sketch that SNL has ever done that involves race? Jeffries referenced Samurai Futaba, a character John Belushi played in the mid to late 70s. Belushi spoke mock Japanese and made exaggerated use of a katana for the recurring role. SNL has indeed rankled viewers with questionable racial humor over the years. Of course, that is true. I mean, Fred Armisen, who is not black, played Barack Obama, and they darkened his skin to do so for years. But apparently, this is no longer acceptable. Bill Burr, who's fantastic, was on a show called Lights Out. He said, if you say something like that, you can't work in a sketch show, but it's like, okay, it's okay for what? He can work at a lumberyard? It's just, it is absurd. Now, the comedy woke scolds are out in force, and that's because a lot of them are just not that good at their jobs. If you're a woke scold, you're less funny. You just are. Nobody wants to hang out with a woke scold. Nobody's going around and being like, you know what I want? You know who I'd love to hang out with? You have a choice. You can have dinner with Bill Burr or Hannah Gadsby. There are 7 people in the United States, and all of them work for The New Yorker, who would say Hannah Gadsby in that scenario. Like 7. Which is why she is not worth as much money as Bill Burr. There's a piece in the New York Times today by a contributing opinion writer named Maeve Higgins called Shane Gillis and the Privilege of Comedy. Oh, God. No! This piece in the New York Times by Maeve Higgins, a contributing opinion writer, which means that she is an expert at comedying. She's creator of the audio series Aliens of Extraordinary Ability, which I'm sure is just a laugh riot. She has a piece today called Shane Gillis and the Privilege of Comedy. Oh, yes, prepared to hold your nose. This piece does stink to high heaven. She says, many of my fellow comics are worrying about freedom of speech. I'm laughing. Right, because you're one of the people who's silencing the freedom of speech. You're laughing like Kamala Harris laughs after she explains how she's going to run roughshod over the Constitution. She says, I've been doing stand-up comedy for 14 years, and at some point I came to despise it. Well, then I think that you should definitely be the judge of stand-up comedy. You despise the entire field you are now critiquing. Clearly, we should take you seriously. She says, it made me feel bad about myself, mostly. The thing I find hardest is the bullying nature, the punching down. I've heard comics on stage mock women and gay people and black people in a variety of ways that still manage to say something new. I've sat in grimy green rooms and witnessed the ego bloat that comes with applause and money, the rewards that come from maintaining the status quo. It's gross, but I stay for the rare and magic flashes of connection. Okay, first of all, if you truly believe that there is no wokeness in comedy, again, you're not watching comedy. Okay, Dave Chappelle's latest special on Netflix. He says some politically incorrect things about what he calls the alphabet crowd, the LGBT crowd. Half of his special is devoted to how he doesn't care if white people die of heroin overdoses. Literally half of it. And how if a heroin junkie were to break into his house, he would shoot him. And what kind of buckshot he would use. So if you think that the politics of comedy are right-wing, you are insane. But this lady is going to make that case. She says, sometimes the funniest thing about comedy is how seriously people take it. And here's where we play the game. The game is, we get to woke scold you. But if you say that that's bad for the country, then you're being serious, man. Stop being serious. So many people on the left are constantly doing this routine. It's so irritating. This routine where they take something iconic, twist it for political purposes, and then when you complain, they're like, why are you getting so serious, man? So they'll take SpongeBob SquarePants and say, SpongeBob is a gay icon. You're like, isn't that a children's toy? Like, how dare you make this an issue? You're making... Guys, I didn't care about SpongeBob until you guys started doing something about SpongeBob. Like, I don't care. I still don't care that much about SpongeBob. When you guys start going after comedy and then we object, that one's on you. She says, I try to avoid the teacup storms that sometimes spill and stain the table around us, but this past week has been messier than usual. A comic named Shane Gillis was hired by SNL, then fired shortly afterward when footage circulated of him being racist on his podcast, calling Chinese people a racial slur, and when Variety reported he'd also made anti-gay comments and stereotyped Muslims on his show. You mean comedy uses stereotypes? As a Jew, I've never heard of anything like this. Stereotyping a group of people based on physical or supposed group characteristics? There's never been any comedy about Jews, ever. So I'm shocked by this. She says that's just a slice of classic stand-up. Nothing strange or startling to any of us who are used to being the butt of jokes. Correct. But don't worry, she's going to make it an issue. She says the fact he was fired is the interesting part. She says many of my comedy colleagues are up in arms, at least digitally. They're calling Mr. Gillis's firing cancel culture and worrying about what it means for freedom of speech. I'm laughing. Yeah, you sound like a delight. She says these anxious comedians are worrying about the wrong problem. Here's where the real silencing happens in the comedy world. So many would-be comics, women, people of color, other marginalized groups are silenced from the beginnings of their careers. Really? I'm confused. Are these mutually exclusive? Is the idea that if Shane Gillis if he's not canceled, if he's still on SNL, are they getting rid of the many black members of the SNL cast? Is that the next step there? Are we resegregating SNL if Shane Gillis doesn't lose his job? Says comedy, like so many of our cultural institutions, remains dominated by men, usually straight and white men. Well, I mean, Dave Chappelle is black and probably the most successful comic working today. Many of the most famous comics ever are black. Many are minorities. Some are women. It's kind of a meritocracy because if you're not funny, then we don't laugh. And if you're Hannah Gadsby and you're not funny, you still get rave reviews from the critics. But apparently it's good to silence comics if they disagree with you politically, and then you laugh about silencing them, which is just the height of comedy. We have seen controversy arising from an ad made by a Cambodian woman named Elizabeth Heng. Her parents were refugees from Cambodia who were nearly killed in the killing fields of Cambodia. She cut an ad that was anti-socialism and included a shot of Alexander Ocasio-Cortez's face. It was a picture, and the picture burned away to reveal the horrors of the Cambodian genocide, and the voiceover basically suggested that AOC doesn't properly understand socialism. This prompted the inestimably brilliant Chris Cuomo of CNN to then claim that Pol Pot and his evil regime in Cambodia had nothing whatsoever to do with socialism. Joining us on the line to discuss is Vic Ath. He is the Deputy Press Secretary and speechwriter in the U.S. Senate. He has a piece in National Review today talking about the true history of Cambodia. Vic, thanks so much for joining the Ben Shapiro Show.
Thank you, Ben. Thanks for having me on.
Sure. So first, why don't you explain sort of your family connection to the Cambodian genocide, and what does Chris Cuomo get wrong when he suggests that it had nothing to do with communism or socialism?
Sure. Well, both of my parents, they were children of the killing fields. Both of them were in the labor camps in the countryside of Cambodia, and they experienced firsthand what true socialism looks like. Under Pol Pot, for Cuomo to point out that Pol Pot wasn't a socialist, that he was just a totalitarian dictator, I mean, it is very misleading, because what not a lot of folks do know is that Pol Pot was educated in France. He spent some time in France, and that's where he was introduced to some of the works of Marx. And in fact, him and some other colleagues, they've actually founded a study group where they read Marxist texts and held self-criticism lessons. And he was also a member of the French Communist Party and attended Communist Party meetings. So to say that, the roots of his brand of communism isn't socialist at all is just a farce.
So why exactly is it that so many Americans shy away from examining the horrors of communism and then make the hard break between so-called democratic socialism and more fully expressed Marxism? And Bernie Sanders, we've seen play this trick. AOC plays the same trick. They talk about socialism, and then what they actually present is Denmark, which is a capitalist country with a social safety net. So why is it so easy for people today to make that shift without discussing the horrors of actually fully implemented government nationalized socialism?
I think, most democratic socialists in this country, I think they're naive in their sentiments. They don't really understand fully the policies that they're pushing for. It sounds popular. It's preached in the college campuses, in the classroom. And I think they're just regurgitating these talking points that you get from leftist professors. If you really dive in and look into the root causes of socialism and the ideology of socialism, I mean, there's not really a distinction between, what democratic socialists are pushing for. They just don't understand the history of the policies that they're advocating for. And I think there needs to be a brighter light on what socialism actually is. And I think that begins on the college campus.
Speaking of education on the college campus, let's say that you were put in charge of a class and you were asked to teach about the history of socialism and its place in the current world. Which would be the country you focus on? Because we focus on, in the United States, Denmark and Norway. The fact is that Venezuela, Cuba, and China are significantly better examples. Which country would you choose to focus on?
I mean, especially with my family's history, I would say Cambodia is a perfect example of what pure socialism looks like. I mean, Pol Pot was very extreme and pure in his viewpoint of how to implement socialism. My father, he recalled as a child, they were taught different slogans and chants that the children were all forced to learn at these labor camps in the countryside of Cambodia. And they called for the destruction of capitalism, the abolition of private property. They said that all religious figures were leeches on society, that they stole from the people. There needs to be an end to religion. And that they needed to deny. Oh, go ahead.
Vic Ath, Deputy Press Secretary and Speechwriter. I'm so sorry that we're out of time here, but you should go check out his piece in National Review on this topic. Vic, thanks so much for your time. One of the more irritating aspects of current politics is this tendency of politicians to bring in children, to scream at them, and then they're like, well, we have to listen to the children. We have to listen to them. They know things. Okay, I have 2 children, under the age of 6. When they scream at me, as a good parent, I'm less likely to listen to them when they scream at me because they don't know things. See, they're small and they don't know things and their brains are not fully developed. But for politicians, they like to bring in young, fresh-faced young people who lead movements. Movements to do what? No one knows. And movements to shout at things, to tell the adults they're not doing enough. What are the adults supposed to? We don't know, but you're the adult. Figure it out. Okay, well, if I'm supposed to figure it out, then why are you yelling at me? Have you negotiated anything? When was the last time that you involved yourself in an international negotiation as opposed to, just standing up in front of a crowd and screaming at people? Like, when was the last time that actually happened? And if you have an alternative, happy to hear it. happen. But that's not what happens. Now it's bring forth we saw this in the aftermath of the Parkland shooting, that a bunch of young people were brought forth, and it was like, oh, look at the purity of their intent. It's like, okay, well, I'm glad that they have pure intentions. They're free to be politically active. And I'm free to point out that many of them don't know what they're talking about. Because just because you're affected by an incident does not mean that you are now an expert on the incident. I watched my wife give birth twice. This does not make me an expert on childbirth. It makes me somebody who has seen a childbirth take place. Okay, so the reason this comes up is because there is a girl named Greta Thunberg. And I say girl because she's 16. She's a 16-year-old Swedish activist who has galvanized young people across the world to strike for more action to combat the impact of global warming. There's a story today that New York might let 1 million children not go to school to strike against global warming. What are they going to do? Fight the sun? Are they going to go out there and just start taking balloons and sucking all the carbon out of it? Like, what exactly are they going to do other than not be in school? Which is just another excuse not to be poorly educated by the New York public school system. So she's testifying in front of Congress, and we're all supposed to care deeply because she took like a sailboat over from Sweden. And because she is mad at climate change and she's mad at you adults, why can't you do something about all of this? Again, open to ideas. Here she is, and everybody cheers, and there's a slow pan in on her. We're 5 minutes away from a hero movie about Greta Thunberg, of course. Backlit, hero shot, cute, innocent 16-year-old girl. Here she is explaining why the adults have ruined everything, those cruel, evil adults.
I have not come to offer any prepared remarks at this hearing. I'm instead attaching my testimony. It is the IPCC Special Report on Global Warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius, the SR 1.5. I am submitting this report as my testimony because I don't want you to listen to me. I want you to listen to the scientists.
Okay, that's not a solution. That isn't. Okay, and she went further. She said, if you want advice for what you should do, invite scientists, ask scientists for their expertise. We don't want to be heard. We want the science to be heard. Okay, if you think that scientists haven't talked to Congress before, they have. There is a widespread consensus in the scientific community that climate change is happening, and that is anthropogenic. Right? There is a very widespread, the percentage of how much is human activity caused is up for debate. The sensitivity of the climate to carbon emissions is up for debate. The scale of the climate change over the course of the next century is up for debate, even in the IPCC report that she submitted for evidence. Right? All of that is up for debate. And the solutions are super up for debate because there are some people who are like, Green New Deal, kill all the cows, take down the airplanes, no more cars. And then there are folks who say, we should aim for a giant international agreement with the Chinese and the Indians, which is never going to happen. And then there are folks who say, well, maybe we should look at geoengineering and technological fixes. Andrew Yang says that. There are folks who say maybe we need to build more seawalls. Maybe we should look at how to mitigate the effects of climate change. Maybe we should stop worrying quite so much about how we cripple 15% of global emissions happening here in the United States, representing a huge chunk of the world's economy. And there are lots of different ways to talk about the problem, how to tackle it, what the impacts are, the economic costs, but that's not what this is about. What this is about is this young girl getting up and being the face of change. Now, what the hell is change? What does it look like? No one knows. But she's really passionate, and we care about passion. We don't care about solutions in American politics. She says, I know you are trying, but just not hard enough. Sorry. Senator Ed Markey, the Massachusetts Democrat who co-sponsored the Green New Deal and then voted against it, leads the Senate task force. And he smiled. Markey told Thunberg, we need your leadership. Do we? Do we need the leadership of a 16-year-old girl who's providing no actual policy? Like, shouting at things is not a policy. I know Bernie Sanders thinks it's a policy, and Ed Markey think these are policies. They're not policies. By the way, the Paris Climate Accords were not a policy. Because you know who signed that thing? China. You know who the number one emitter is? China. You know who didn't sign that thing? Or didn't implement that thing or backed out of it? The United States. You know which country has lowered its emissions more than any other over the last 4 years? The United States. Markey said, we need your leadership. Young people are the army politically, which has arrived in the United States. You put a spotlight on this issue in a way it has never been before. And that is creating a new X factor. He said, we hear you. We hear what you're saying. We will redouble our efforts. To do what? To do what? To do what should always be the question. You're not trying hard enough. I'm so tired of that nonsense. You mean I disagree with your garbage solution that you haven't even offered? So I'm not trying hard enough? Like that's where we're going to, and we do the same thing on gun control. Well, if we just tried harder, we could come to consensus. If you weren't in the pocket of the NRA, no, maybe I just think that your solution is crap. Did that ever occur to you? Maybe you're not offering a solution. Maybe you took a boat all the way over here from Europe to grandstand. And listen, you're 16. You can do it. If people want to put a camera in your face, more power to you. I'm not mad at Greta Thunberg. I'm mad at all the people who are pretending that this is a serious conversation when it is simply grandstanding. You're not advocating for any specific change. You're just saying you don't like a thing that is bad. That is not helpful. You know what else I don't like? Bad things. We can all agree. Things that are bad are bad. Now that we've reached this glorious consensus, what would you have us do? That seems like that probably should be the question. Okay, so shocking story of the day. You ready? Prepare to be shocked. So you remember Lauren Duca. Lauren Duca is a former Teen Vogue columnist who somehow obtained a lecturer position at New York University School of Journalism. And you recall that she and I got into it over something, I can't remember, on Twitter, and then we had her on the show, and she actually said on the radio show that she was going, like she had the conversation with me on speakerphone, so her class could hear. And it didn't go fantastically well for Lauren Duca, in my own humble opinion. Well, now it turns out her class is kind of ticked at Lauren Duca because it turns out that she wasn't actually teaching them. According to a BuzzFeed News profile, which was published on Tuesday, the students from her 6-week course alleged that Duca cared more about selling copies of her new book than actually teaching, would belittle students, including one she allegedly singled out for not speaking English very well. Like it's time to cancel Lauren Duca, guy. She can't be on SNL anymore. And failed to read their submitted work. Nearly 4 weeks after the course ended, her students sent a collective formal complaint to the head of the NYU Journalism School about Duca's conduct. What, you mean that a grandstanding Teen Vogue columnist didn't make a spectacular journalism professor? I cannot believe this. 5 out of the 10 students had similar allegations against Duca and the class's structure, that Duca didn't follow her own syllabus, that she spoke often and inappropriately about her personal life. Shocker. Shocker. That she would belittle and yell at students, and most pressingly, that she targeted one student in particular. The complaint read, quote, "We are disappointed at the department and NYU for hiring a professor with more interest in promoting her book than teaching a group of students eager to learn. There was a consistent lack of professionalism that persisted throughout every aspect of the course. We are disappointed at the department and NYU as an institution for hiring a professor without a syllabus and classroom management skills. We are disappointed at the department and NYU for hiring a professor without a clear course objective." Who could have predicted such a thing? The shocking story of the day. Okay, this is spectacular. You ready for this? The students also accused Duca of disappearing for, quote, 30 to 45 minutes per class to meditate. Duca said, "It was a 3-hour class. We took a break. I'd meditate for 15 minutes. They'd be gone getting snacks and stuff." One student told BuzzFeed, "It's frustrating to see as a young woman, see how somebody can so clearly take advantage of the system and capitalize on her supposed wokeness while not practicing what she's writing about." Ouch. The students ended their complaint, "Sincerely, the feminist journalist class, summer 2019. The students would only speak to BuzzFeed because they didn't, and anonymously, because they didn't want blowback. They said it was a waste of 6 weeks for all of us. And they were speaking out because they don't want anyone ever making that mistake ever again. Here was Duca's response. Ready? "It's okay if I'm not a great teacher because I'm great at lots of other things." That's an unbelievably great response. And it's so good. You're being paid by NYU to teach at their journalism school, to do the teaching. And people are like, "You're crappy at teaching. Your class is hot garbage. It is a steaming pile of manure. You're meditating during class and talking about your personal life. You're being all weird. You're speaker phoning in conversations with radio hosts in your class. Like, what the hell's wrong with you?" And she's like, "Well, you know, it's okay if I'm not great at teaching. I'm great at, like, I don't know, cooking. I do like paint nights on the side. I go to singles bars and that's fun." Like, what? Excellent job, NYU, doing an amazing job on behalf of higher education. Just stellar work. I can see why parents are spending $100,000 a year to send their kids to NYU. Just well done, everyone. Well, this is a hotly fraught Democratic campaign. Everybody is focusing in on 3 key candidates because these are the only ones who are breaking double digits at this point. Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders. There are a couple of new polls out today discussing the race Here to talk about it is Kristen Soltis Anderson. She's a pollster, speaker, commentator, author of The Selfie Vote, where millennials are leading America, and how Republicans can keep up. She's also co-founder of Echelon Insights. Kristen, great to talk to you.
Thanks for having me.
So why don't we start with the latest polls? Where does the race stand at this point in time? It looks mostly, from what I can see, that in these polls, the big loser seems to be Bernie Sanders, who's just receding and receding.
Yeah, Bernie Sanders really is only beloved by the very youngest portion of the Democratic Party. If you take a look at the most recent NBC Wall Street Journal poll came out just yesterday, it wound up showing Bernie Sanders in first place with young Democrats under 35. He's at almost a third, 20-some points ahead of Joe Biden with that group. But among senior Democrats, he's only at 2%. That's such a huge swing and such a huge generation gap. And it's going to be hard for Bernie Sanders to be able to pull off the nomination if he can't expand beyond his sort of young, for lack of a better term, Bernie bro demographic that he tends to do quite well with.
And it looks like Elizabeth Warren is carving into his support. It doesn't look like she's grabbing her support from Joe Biden specifically. It looks like he's basically maintaining his numbers. Most of the polls seem to be all over the place about his level of support, anywhere from the low to mid 20s to the low to mid 30s. But he doesn't seem to be losing support to Warren. It looks like Sanders is losing his support to Warren.
That's right. Warren is positioning herself as someone where if you like Bernie Sanders' policy agenda, she's trying to associate herself with it almost entirely. But she tries to be very careful in her rhetoric to say, look, I'm a capitalist. I'm not a socialist. She tries to position herself as someone who can be viewed as more serious, thoughtful. She doesn't want revolution. She just wants structural reform. And the idea is that this would be more palatable to a swing voter. So if you're a progressive Democrat who cares a lot about electability, you may have very well-founded concerns about Bernie Sanders, but think Elizabeth Warren could maybe split the difference for you.
Now, if you look at Joe Biden's candidacy, obviously people seem to be discounting Biden. The pollsters right now, at least the odds makers, have Elizabeth Warren as the front runner for the nomination. I'm wondering where they see Elizabeth Warren carving into what is left of Joe Biden's support. So Joe Biden, before he jumped into the race, was polling around 30%. He jumped into the race. He jumped all the way up to 40. Now he's back down to about 30%. And it seems to be a fairly durable 30%, 28 to 30%. It doesn't seem like that's moving very much. Are odds makers just supposing that Bernie Sanders, the rest of Sanders' support bleeds all the way over to Warren? Or do they expect that Biden's base of support is going to fall away? Because his base of support is disproportionately black, and Elizabeth Warren is whiter than I am.
Well, if you take a look at Biden's base, you're right. It's predominantly older Democrats and it's black Democrats. And so Elizabeth Warren's advantage right now is that she's able to draw about a quarter of the party from almost every demographic group, black, white, young, old, college-educated, non-college educated. So I think that's what's driving odds makers to think she has a better chance, that at the moment she does not appear to have a narrow base of support among just certain pieces of the coalition, but that she can bring everybody together. But bear in mind, people made this same mistake about Donald Trump 4 years ago. He was polling in sort of the low 30s. And the assumption was once other people got out of the race, that that the support would not ultimately go to Trump. It would split among other candidates, or maybe it would coalesce into a Marco Rubio or a Ted Cruz. And that didn't happen. Some of those folks, once their candidate dropped out, came around to Trump. And so that may well happen. I don't know if Biden is at his ceiling because 4 years ago, frankly, we were flawed in thinking that Trump had hit his ceiling.
I mean, one of the things that is so fascinating about this particular race is the prevailing assumption that Elizabeth Warren is a fantastic candidate. I think that she's a clever candidate, but it seems like the media's just fawning treatment of her is responsible for a lot of this. She launched with a fizzle, and then she's grown from there, which is a good place to be, but it's still very early. She really hasn't seen significant negative media coverage since this boomlet began for her. I'm wondering if you think that is going to change at all, whether you think that people are going to start getting skeptical of her radical progressive turn in the last couple of years. I mean, she actually used to be much more heterodox on policy. You saw a little bit of it last night on Stephen Colbert when he was grilling her about whether she's going to raise middle-class taxes, and she was just doggedly avoiding the issue completely. Do you think that there's any sort of negative media coverage in the future for Warren, or does she just keep riding this thing?
I think if it becomes clear that she's going to have some real electability issues stemming from the middle class tax issue, which she's always dodging on, and the fact that she has really wedded herself to this Medicare for all, kind of the most extreme version of Medicare for all, which would eliminate all employer-based insurance. Most of the other Democrats in the field have tried to leave themselves an off-ramp. They get that it's the sort of thing it's actually not terribly popular with voters, and they want to be able to sort of split the difference and back out of that position if it becomes a threat to them. Well, for Elizabeth Warren, she's really doubled down, and I think if there are folks that start to worry about her electability, that she has maybe gone too far to the left in pursuit of the nomination, that could change. But I think you're right. She's getting incredibly favorable coverage. I think my favorite story of the last 24 hours or so has been this fawning coverage about her selfie lines. Claims that she goes to these rallies and she'll take 4,000 selfies. And setting aside that these articles are usually mystifying the word selfie, in order for it to be a selfie, someone in the picture needs to actually be holding the phone. Otherwise, it's just a photo line, which is something that campaigns have been doing forever. But it is true that she does do sort of the nuts and bolts of campaigning more effectively than some of these other folks in the race. That can pay dividends in a place like Iowa, where having a really good ground operation matters. But at the moment, the race is kind of boring. And so folks in the media are really focusing on these process stories, the kind of lack of anything else to write about regarding 2020.
So, Kristen, when we look at the future of the race, it seemed before the debate last week that we had basically the end of the good, the bad, and the ugly, with all three of the leading candidates aiming their guns at each other and no one wanting to be the first to fire. Biden wanting Warren and Sanders to go at each other, Sanders wanting Warren and Biden to go at each other, Warren wanting Sanders and Biden to go at each other. And now it seems as Bernie Sanders loses support, it seems to me it's only a matter of time until Bernie has to open up his guns on Warren, because if she's taking his support, what good does it do for him to attack Joe Biden and boost her?
I mean, this is something that is fascinating to me. If you saw Senator Harris, Kamala Harris went after Joe Biden in that first debate. And actually, I mean, her support has completely faded since then. She wasn't able to capitalize on it at all. But that created a viral moment. Conflict creates these viral moments. And it vaulted her up into that second tier of candidates. It put her right in Bernie and Elizabeth Warren land in the polls. She wasn't able to sustain it. But I'm stunned that some of these folks have not tried to either challenge Biden more, to try to take a piece of his, conservative to moderate lane within the party, those sorts of Democrats, or that nobody's really trying to challenge Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders on this front, that they're sort of letting each other, playing footsie with each other, being nice, because this was something that Republicans who wanted to defeat Donald Trump failed to do in 2016. Everybody thought, well, let's not worry about him. Let's just all, the second and third tier candidates all just fought each other, and figured, well, we'll turn our attention to Trump later on. By the time they did, it was too late. So I think it is stunning to me that so many of these candidates are not trying to draw really clear contrast. Why me and why not him at this point?
Kristen Soltis Anderson, pollster, speaker, commentator, author of The Selfie Vote. Go pick up the book. Kristen, thanks so much for your time. Coming up, we will discuss more about the Joe Biden race. Is he the real front runner or not? This is Ben Shapiro Show.